Okay, very interesting Gemara today. Page Bava base 86b, toward the bottom. At second to bottom line, 86b. What's the discussion? We start off with Rabbi Yehudah, something small, right? Rabbi Yehudah says that a summa, a blind person, does not have baishas. I explained that there's no baishas. We explained it was the Gemara had a debate, an open question whether baishas meant shame or whether baishas meant the way other people's perception of him. No. We said, for example, while a child obviously acts like a child, meaning he has very little shame, but it's very easy to embarrass the child in front of the eyes of others. Whereas to embarrass the child in a way that the child feels shame, the Gemara said it was possible at the end, but it wasn't so common. Rabbi Yehudah says that Rabbi Yehudah's interesting opinion is that a blind person does not have embarrassment, and is also exempt if he embarrasses others. And obviously, that type of exemption is learned from the pasuk. The verse clearly indicates that you have to have eyes to see. And now,
could also be auditory.
I'm sorry.
Embarrassment could also be auditory. I mean, by virtue of what people are saying and doing around the blind person, they can figure out they're being the butt of somebody's joke or something.
Yeah. So the argument of Rabbi Yehudah is that a blind person is exempt because the verse indicates he's exempt.
Okay.
Not only is he exempt from both being paid for having been embarrassed and paying for embarrassing somebody else, he's also exempt from lashes. He's exempt from the death penalty, and he's exempt from exile, and he's exempt as he's not kosher as a false witness. He's not kosher for witness. For witness. Okay. So yesterday we've seen exile, we've seen witnesses, and we've seen summa, blind person. Now we're at the capital punishment, the death penalty. 2 lines in the bottom, 86b. Someone who kills unintentionally and someone who kills intentionally are both called a reitzeach. They're equated to each other. Tell me that a summa, a blind person, is exempt. Chayve malchus, lashes. Asi rasha mechayve mitzvah bezdin. The Torah calls somebody convicted with capital punishment a rasha, a wicked person. And likewise, that is equated to the wicked person mentioned by the Torah with regards to malchus, to getting lashes. So the lashes and death penalty are equated to each other. To tell me that a summa, blind person, is exempt. Tanya Idach, another bright says, your Yehuda Amar, summa ele baishas. A blind person does not pay for embarrassment and doesn't get paid for embarrassment either. Yehuda says he's exempt from all of the Torah. My timer, the Rabbi Yehudah. What's the reason of Rabbi Yehudah? Amar krov shaftu eda bein hamaka ubein goyel hadam al hamishpat ma'ela. Goyel hadam is the redeemer of the blood. So in other words, you think of someone who kills by accident. The relatives of the deceased have a right to avenge the blood of their relatives by killing the accidental murderer. By the way, the Torah calls him a murderer. I didn't just add that moniker of my own. Torah says you kill by accident, you are called a murderer, you're called a ritzach. So they have a right to kill the accidental murderer before he enters a city of refuge. Okay, now when the Torah speaks of discussion regarding avenging the blood of the deceased, it says shaftu eda bein hamaka ubein goyel hadam ala mishpat me'ela. we will judge between the deceased and between the murderer and the avenger of the blood. Al mishpatim ha'ela, on these laws. Mishpatim is laws. Says Rabbi Yehudah, Kol sheyeshna b'mak u'b'goyel adam yeshna b'mishpatim. Kol she'ein maka b'goyel adam ein b'mishpatim. If you're in the category of going to exile, meaning you can see, you can go to exile. Then you're in the category of all the mishpatim, all the laws of the Torah. But if you're not in the category of goyel adam, because like Rabbi Yehudah explained, a blind person is exempt from going to exile. The Torah says that he didn't see, meaning that otherwise he was able to see, like we saw yesterday. So therefore, you'd be exempt from every other mitzvah of the Torah. Tanya Idach, Rabbi Yehudah says, Suma ein lebaishas. A blind person does not have embarrassment, does not have shame, and doesn't pay for embarrassment either. And Rabbi Yehudah would exempt him from all mitzvahs of the Torah. Amar Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Yidi, my time Rav Yehudah. Rav Shisha said, "What's the reason of Rav Yehudah?" Amar Krava Elah HaMitzvahs HaChukim HaMishpatim. These are the mitzvahs, the chukim, and the mishpatim. I don't want to go into the exact differences, but I believe there are 5 words to describe the general word of mitzvahs. Here you have 3 of them: mitzvahs, chukim, mishpatim. There's 2 more. There's eidos and pikudim, I believe. Maybe even a 6th one, I'm not sure. Okay, so if you have, so now, with regard to the Goyel Adam, the Redeemer of the blood, we know that he's exempt from all the mishpatim. But how do we know he's exempt from chukim and mitzvahs as well? Again, other words used to basically to describe, to translate for the word law. So the Gemara says, because all these are equated. There's right? God says, I gave you mitzvahs. These are the mitzvahs, the chukim and the mishpatim. If you have mishpatim, you have mitzvahs and chukim. Kol sheyeshna mishpatim, yeshna mitzvahs and chukim. Kol she'ein mishpatim, ein mitzvahs chukim. You don't have mitzvahs and chukim either. Yehudah says you're exempt from everything. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was blind. So Rav Yosef says, Mereish initially Havamin. I said to myself, Man da Amar halacha Rav Yehudah, da Amar suma potter min mitzvahs. Whoever says that the halacha follows Rav Yehudah, whose opinion is that a blind person is exempt from all mitzvahs. Kavidna Yomi Bava, I'll make a big party for the rabbis. Whoever tells that to me. Why? Because my time, because this way I'm exempt. I'm not obligated to do the mitzvahs. V'kavidna, and I'm doing the mitzvahs, and I'm doing them anyway. So in other words, he felt that was a greater act of service to not have to do it and to do it anyway. However, Vahash was a shamit. But now that I found out Lahad Rav Chanina, that Rav Chanina said, Rav Chanina taught Rav Chanina Godel HaMitzvah V'Ayis Misha Eina Mitzvah V'Ayis. To the contrary, it's better to be obligated and to perform than to not be obligated and perform. Godel Misha Eina Mitzvah V'Ayis, from someone who's not obligated and performs the mitzvahs. So then to the contrary, I said, Man da Amrli Ein Halacha Rav Yehudah Avidna Yomi Bava. Whoever says the halacha does not follow Rav Yehudah, meaning that I am obligated in performing the mitzvahs, then I'll make them a party. My time, mafkidna isli agrafei. Now that I am commanded, I can earn more rewards. Okay, this does seem not to square very well with the Mishnah. It says that one should not serve God to earn reward. And if you're interested, if that bothers you, you can ask me afterwards. I can explain to you the reason. It's not a contradiction.
You should not.
You should not be serving God to earn a reward. This seems to run pretty contradictory to that, but it doesn't. We can talk about that later. Okay. Now get back to Bava Kamma again. The differences between a man and an ox. What are the differences? Remember, we're in Perak Chayva, right? So obviously something will have to do with Chavola. Chavola, if you recall, is battering, man to man. A man who damages pays these 5 categories. He also pays He also pays the Demei Vlodas. We spoke about this a couple of times in the past. The Demei Vlodas is where a man and woman are a man strikes a pregnant woman and causes a miscarriage. The value of the fetus is paid to her husband. It's a unique type of payment. It's only paid by assault. man to female, whatever, humankind to female. Okay. V'shor enim mishalom ela nezek. An ox that damages, whether it damages another ox or whether it damages a person, enim mishalom ela nezek, you only pay nezek. Upater midvladas, you're exempt from paying for the fetus. Okay. Now we get back to Kollel b'derabmine, right? Tamakas of v'esima. Familiar with Kollel b'derabmine? Kollel b'derabmine basically is the concept that you get the most severe penalty. If you have multiple potential for multiple penalties, you will not get. The only penalty you'll get is the most severe one. Okay, so this is not an example of Kollel b'derabmine. Let's explain. Hamakas of v'esima. Somebody who hits their parents, but he did not make a wound. There's no wound to it. Or somebody who hits his friend in Yom Kippur also does not incur capital punishment. Chayav b'kulon, they have to pay all 5 categories of nezikin. Hachayav b'eved ivri, somebody who damages an eved ivri. Chayav b'kulon chutz min hashavas, he pays for everything except for shavas. Shavas is the time off of work. If the slave is, if it's his eved ivri, his slave, so why should he have to pay for time off of work if that's his time anyway? He's already bought that time. Somebody damages an eved kanani of somebody else. Chayav b'kulon, they have to pay all 5 payments. Rabbi Yehudah says, a slave does not have embarrassment. Okay. Cheresh shaita v'katan. Cheresh deaf, shaita, someone who's psychotically deranged, that they used to call mads. And katan, a child. Pigiyas and raw. Getting into a fight with them is not a good idea. It's a bad thing. Why? If you damage them, you have to pay. However, if they damage others, they are exempt. Getting into a fight with a slave or a woman is also problematic. Why? If you damage them, you have to pay. If they damage others, then they're temporarily exempt. But they pay after time. What does this mean? Let's say the woman gets divorced, or nishtach, or ever the slave becomes free, then chayav and l'shalom, then they have to pay. In other words, while the woman is still married, again, there is we spoke about this quite a few times before, just very briefly, within the context of shared finances in a marriage. Obviously, there is no requirement that the husband and wife share finances. Right, the Gemara gives Rav Huna as an example. Huna and his wife used to have 2 separate checkbooks. However, the typical arrangement is that all the assets the woman brings in to the marriage, they become something called nichse melug. Nichse melug is the basically the husband is allowed to use them and benefit from their income, but the principal is owned by the woman. Because of that, she doesn't have a right to sell it while she is married. So even if she does have money, she can't pay the money. And then the general expectation is that if the woman works, the money will go to the husband, who's obligated to support her. So it's most likely that she won't be able to pay. It could be if they have two separate checkbooks, that would be different. But once she's divorced, she gets back all her property. She doesn't owe anything to the husband. Or if the slave becomes free, then they have to pay. Somebody who hits his parents and he does make a wound. Or somebody who wounds his friend on Shabbos. He's exempt from everything. Because he faces a potential conviction of a capital offense. Somebody who damages an eved kanani shalai that belongs to him. Potter mikulan, he is entirely exempt. Rabbi Lazar had the following question of Rav. Hachayvel bebas katana shalacherim. Chavol lemi. Okay, so let's work through this pretty briefly. Until your daughter is 6 months post puberty, we call that a begeris. When she's within the 6 months of puberty, we call that a naira. And when she's prior to puberty, she's called iktana. Okay, when she's a ktana or a naira, sorry, when she's a ktana, the father could sell her as a slave. He could also marry her off until she concludes the phase of naira.
6 months after.
6 months afterwards. Now, by the fact that the father can marry her off, that means that he does have some control over her, obviously, and that control includes, sort of implied. There are certain implications from that type of control. It's true that the father is not allowed to beat his daughter, or certainly, obviously, and he's not allowed to sell his daughter after she's the age of 12. But the fact that he can marry her off to somebody who might treat her like a slave certainly indicates that there's some control over her income producing capabilities. And the question here is, do these reflect the fact that he can sell her as a slave and the fact that he can marry her off? Does that indicate to us that he actually owns her and therefore he's deserving of any damage that accrues to her? Or no? To what the Torah says, Torah said, and nothing more than that. You can sell her for a slave until 12. You can marry her off until 12 and a half, and nothing more than that. Okay, so boy mi neighbor belozim mirav. If somebody, by the way, I'll just mention briefly, if you remember, we had a Taisvis. Taisvis was about 4 months ago. Some Daf Membeis in Kedushin. The Gemara says that a man is forbidden to marry off his daughter when she's a child. She has to be old enough, obviously, 12 years old or older, to choose somebody. However, Taisa says that in his time, people were so poor, and the pogroms and the anti-Semitism was so great that people married off their daughters young because they figured that if they were able to provide some sort of dowry to have their daughters attractive, better to provide it when they had it than to wait a couple of years and who knows what would happen.
Improve the chances of survival. Take the first good pitch that comes along.
Correct. Okay. So Rabbi Lozer Mirav. So Rabbi Lozer is the following question from Rav. Somebody damages, wounds the daughter of somebody else. Who does the damage go to? Me, I'm going to do. We say, since the Torah says the benefit of childhood is to the father. The payment for damages also goes to the father. My time because ultimately now she's less attractive, either as a slave or on the to find a potential suitor. The benefit to marry her off, yeah, he could marry her off, and that includes that he is able to, he gets to keep her. If she gets married, he gets to keep the kedushin. If it's money that's given for kedushin, he's able to keep it. If it's a ring, he can keep the ring as well. So the Gemara's question is, do we say that because he's able to, that he's, in other words, the kedushin he's able to keep because he can marry her off to a person who's a mukashkin. Mukashkin is someone who has like a leprosy, a blemish of the skin. So that he's able to do, but he can't beat her. So why should he get the penalty? Why should he get the payments if somebody else does? In other words, what the Torah allows you to do is to marry her off and to keep the kedushin. Fine, so marry her off and keep the kedushin, but you can't hit her, and therefore you shouldn't be entitled to keep her damages either. Okay, top of Pezayin and Beis 87b. Amar Lai, he told him the Torah la'av ela shvach nu'urim bilvad. The Torah permits the Torah only permits the father to keep what the Torah allowed him to keep. In other words, he can marry her off until age 12 and a half. He can sell her as a slave until age 12. These benefits of childhood and of beginning of maturity. Okay. So Gemara says, Esva, I'll ask a question. Somebody who damages an Eved Ivri pays everything, chutz min hasheves, except for sheves. Bismanshu shaloi, if the Eved Ivri is his own slave. Okay, now the Gemara is asking if a slave, if the sheves of a slave goes to his master, so why doesn't the sheves of the girl who could be sold as a slave also go to her father, who has the ability to sell her as a slave? Right? Because the ability to sell her as a slave is sheves. It's how to make use of a productive time. So the sheves at least should go to the girl. So Gemara says, Amar Abaye, right. Because her income until the age of maturity belongs to the father, so therefore it's true the sheves payment would go to the father, at least the component that would be prior to her maturity. Esvei, question. If somebody wounds his son, his adult son, he pays him immediately. And his son who's a child, Yaslei Segula. Segula is like an investment. He sets it aside, and he sets aside the money, and when the child gets older, he can have it. What do they call this in English? There's a custodian account. Was that?
What do you think? Trust fund maybe, or?
Yeah, something like that. In a trust or custodian.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. If somebody damages his daughter, Potter, he's completely exempt. If other people damage his daughter, they have to pay the father the damages. This clearly contradicts Abaye's statements. So I'm sorry, Rav. It was Rav. It clearly contradicts Rav. Rav says that the father does not collect damages. It's the father has no right to injure his daughter, so why should he have the ability to collect damages that are being paid to her? So why is it that in this price it seems that the father does get it?
Was he the damages he
damages somebody else damages his daughter, he gets to keep this price says he gets to keep it. Rav says he doesn't. What's the difference? The Gemara says no, Hachanami b'sheves, we're talking about sheves, meaning the payment for the fact that she can't work, at least during the time she can't work. She should be able to babysit or something, right? But now she can't babysit, she's in the hospital. That value is paid to the father. But if the father damaged his daughter, the father would be exempt on that specific of the 5 payments. But the other 4 payments he would have to make to his daughter. Okay, we're not done yet. An adult child, you give him immediately? Hold on a second. Raminu, I have a question. Somebody who damages his sons or daughters. I'm sorry, the sons or daughters of somebody else. If they're adults, you pay them immediately. Kitana, if they're children, Yaslam Segula, you put it into a trust. But if a person damages his own sons and daughters, Potter is completely exempt. Well, why is that? So the Gemara says, Amri loy kasha. So the Gemara explains it's not difficult. If they rely on him for food, so then if he damages them, then he's obligated to pay. If they don't rely on him for food, so then if he damages them, they're independent. Then he has to pay them. So the Gemara says, how are you explaining this? You're telling me that he has to pay them when they don't rely on him for food. It's just one problem. The previous brisa just said that if somebody else damages his daughter, they pay the father. Right? Now, we explained that what are they paying the father? They're paying the father sheves. Right? Sheves is the fact that she can't work. But hold on a second. That brisa we said is referring to somebody who doesn't rely on his father for income. For sustenance. Father is not supporting his daughter. So why does the sheves go to him? he's not supporting his daughter, he shouldn't have to pay Shevis at all. I'm sorry, the Shevis should not go to him. He should have to pay Shevis to his daughter, or the other people should pay Shevis to his daughter.
But just for the 6-month period, right? Just for the 6-month period.
However long, if a guy's not supporting his kids, then why do his kids' income go to him?
It wouldn't matter how old they are
Not necessarily.
in this case.
I'm saying, okay, let's be very clear. If somebody doesn't support the children when they're young, we take a millstone, we flip it over in public, we put them on top of it, and we tell them that ravens care for their children more than him. It's Gemara in Ksubis, if you remember, in Daf in Samach somewhere. It's absolutely unacceptable for a person not to support his kids. Let's make it very clear. You have to support your kids until they're adults. There's no question about it.
But the question is,
But now we're not. The adult is maturity at the time, but 12 or 13, and physical maturity as well. But that's not the discussion here. We're talking obviously a guy who is worse than a raven. This guy's more cruel than a raven. So we're talking about okay, whatever it is, for whatever reason, the guy is not supporting his kids. Maybe the guy himself was an invalid. Who knows? Okay. 1 second. But regardless, the guy should be supporting his kids, but he's not. If he's not supporting his kids, then his daughter's income goes to her. She doesn't have to provide her income to her father if her father is not supporting her. And again, she's obviously a child. Because she has to support herself. Let's explain. With regard to a woman, 1 second. I'm sorry. There's a debate whether a master could tell his slave, "I'd like you to work for you, but work for me, for my slave, but I'm not supporting you. Go to the wedding hall every night. There's a poor person's table. You can go eat on that table. You go to the food pantry, find some bite to eat there. I'm not giving you anything to eat." So machlokes is whether that's permitted or not. One opinion says it is permitted. The reason it's permitted is the Amar lei avad avid tekuliyim. I want you to work for me a whole day. Ulo zil schar v'achal. Go around and schnar some money, go to all the shuls, find some leftover danishes on the table, and you can. That's what you can eat, and he's entitled to. He's an evet kanani. Aval evet ivri, but a Jewish slave, the chsivki tov imach imcha b'meichel mishta imcha b'meichel imcha b'mishta. A Jewish slave has to be together with you on the table. So in other words, a non-Jewish slave, you could have the slave kitchen. They cook matzah or something like that. Give them something cheap to eat. But for a Jewish slave, he eats at your table. Whatever you're eating, you're going to give him too. If that's the case, you have no right to tell him, work for me and I'm not supporting you. Go to the weddings and shuls and go collect and eat. Eat at the end of the day. So loikolshke vitoy. Certainly, if you can't have your Jewish slave that you purchased, you can't have him go to the wedding halls to eat. The food pantry. So certainly, your own daughter, you for sure can't do that too. If you're not supporting her, she gets to keep her income. So the Gemara says, okay, well, as follows. In other words, if you're supporting your own daughter, you are exempt from paying her damages. And not just a daughter, the same is true of a son. And the same is true whether they're children or whether they're adults. If they're independent, you have to pay them. If they're independent and you damage them, you have to pay them. Now, even if they're independent, remember, your daughter, you have a right to sell as a slave. Now, if you're not supporting your daughter financially, your daughter, meaning she's under 12 years old, so you're not supporting her. She's going and, what do they call it? She's struggling to make ends meet.
Oh, okay.
And you can't tell her, well, I want your income, go to the wedding halls at night. Food pantry. No, it doesn't work that way. You're not giving her food. She doesn't have to go to the food pantry either. However, let's say she's, this 11-year-old, remarkably successful. She becomes very wealthy. Remember, he's allowed to sell his daughter as a slave, which means he is entitled for income above and beyond what's necessary for her to support herself. So when we talk about sheves, we talk about, so now she's in the hospital, she can't babysit. So for argument's sake, let's say a babysitter, right, it's $15 an hour, right? Let's say that whatever it is, enough hours to make ends meet. If she would be paid $10 an hour, she'd make ends meet. Now that she's being paid 15, she has $5 an hour extra. That extra money he's entitled to take. Remember, he's entitled to sell her as a slave too. That's why he's entitled to take the money. But he's not supporting her, so he has to give her the basics to be able to support herself. And that's why a certain percentage of sheves he would not have to pay, or if other people damage his daughter, that extra sheves would go to him. Together? Maya kimta lebasrai. So how do we explain the latter brisa? Besmuchan al shulchanai, where the children are relying on their father. The Gemara says, "Gedol mitin lahem yad." 1 second. Okay, this is an obvious question. If they're relying on their father, therefore, if their father damages them, they're not independent. They rely on their father. If their father damages them, he's exempt. But if other people damage them, then where does the money go to? No, the Bryce says it goes to them. But why does it go to them? Why doesn't it go to the father? If they're relying on their father for food, then their income goes to their father. If that's the case, well then the damages should also go to the father. The Maikin Labasrais of Suhanashachana, Gidel Mitan Lahamiyat, Tanami Aslam School. Amai, why are you putting the money? Why are you giving them the money right away or putting it into a trust fund? Why is money going to them, to the adult children? If they rely on their father, they're not independent. Amai, why is that? Laviam by Lamesif. It should be going to the father. So Gemara explains, Amri Kika Kapid B'midid Kachaser. The Midid Asim Alma like Kapid. Okay. Okay. In other words, when the father damages the kids, the father will have a financial loss by paying, right? He's chaser midi. If he has to pay for the damages, he has a loss. So therefore, because he supports his kids, he doesn't have to take that loss. But if the kids get money from the outside, it doesn't pertain to the father. The father doesn't suffer a loss because of that. So then, like Cupid, he doesn't mind, and he lets the kids have the money. Okay, the Gemara says, but not quite, right? Because of a hamitzia, let's say they find a lost object, but not like a real lost object. They find $10,000 on the curb, right on the side of the curb. Who gets to keep it? If they're not independent, their father gets to keep it. And it goes to the father. Gemara says, "Amri Rafka took also lo alma v'les put sarah gufaya b'gaval kapit al chavol is sarah gufaya me alma kasu lahu loy kapit." As follows: when we talk about finding a lost object, right? So nothing happened to the kid. He was walking down the street, kid, adult, whatever it was, child relying on his father. He finds the money. It's a windfall, right? So then the father is jealous. He wants to keep the money. However, if there was a loss, in other words, the kid was the victim of battery, right? So the kid suffered. The kid suffered. There was tzara gufaya. There was suffering that went along with quote unquote earning that penalty. The value of the damages. So then, like Cupid, the father allows the child or the adult, the kids, to keep the money. So Gemara says, "V'hasam de'islet tzara gufa u'me'alma ka'aselu v'kakapid." There is another example where there is pain and the money comes from other people, and yet the father does want the money. The Brisa says, one second. Okay. In other words, where the Brisa concludes, one second. Yeah. The story of the girl that was the victim of a crime by somebody else, of battery. The girl the money that's paid to the girl is kept by the father. The Gemara says, why is that kept by the father? Over there, again, same thing. The father is the father is the money's coming from outside, right? And the kid suffers suffers trauma. So the money should be kept by the child. Moreover, that brisa of the daughter is talking about when the daughter is independent, and yet the money still goes to the father. We explained that it was referring to Sheves and Hadafa, but clearly the father, if the reason, the determining factor of where the money goes to is based on how much the father wants the money that's coming to his kids, so then if the daughter is suffer trauma and money's coming to her, why does the father get to keep that money? The Gemara says, Amri Hassam the Gavra Kabdono. That guy's a troublesome folk. He's extremely jealous of his daughter. He's not even supporting his daughter, and he wants his daughter's financial gain that has nothing to do with him. Over here, clearly the guy is not. The first case, the guy is so jealous of his daughter, he's not even supporting his daughter, and he wants his daughter's money. Over here, the guy, he's generous with his daughter, he's supporting his daughter. So kika kapid, so then he does, he's only jealous the kachasule midi, the aslam alma. If he has his own loss, then he doesn't want to have to pay. He doesn't have to pay if he damages his daughter by accident. But the midi the aslam alma loy kapid. But if the money is coming from outside, it's not his own loss. So then he doesn't have, he's not as jealous, and the money goes to the child or the adult child, whatever it is, whether it's put in a trust or not. We'll talk about the trust tomorrow. That's the right thing.